Welcome to the Veteran Psychedelic Discourse. We are a group that advocates for safe and responsible exploration of mental health treatments. And this is not a platform for the solicitation of illegal substances. Welcome, everybody, to the Veteran Psychedelic Discourse. We have a couple of different articles that we wanted to touch on today, as well as just having some conversation about them. So, looks like it's going to be a small group, but looks like we're going to be able to have a pretty decent conversation based on what we got. So, Brian, would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, Alex was doing some research and he came across an article discussing the use of ayahuasca to help mediate relationships between Palestinian and Israelis. And I thought this was fascinating. One of the aspects of it they kind of get into is the idea that it allows for political liberation and potential like peace building frameworks, which I thought was a phenomenal thing to arrive at, particularly for these two groups of people where there's so much antagonism going on between them. And what happened was I came across another article, and it actually took what I feel like was a more basic view on maybe some of what's going on through the lens of like political views. And what they're arguing is, and what they did was they used two doses of psilocybin separated by 1 week. The first was just 10 milligrams, and then after that, they waited 1 week and they did 25 milligrams. And as a result of it, it showed across 7 to 12 months, which is when I'm believing they did the survey for, it showed a significant change in political views, particularly a decrease in authoritarian views. And when we say authoritarian political views, I think a better way to look at that would be maybe just like very rigid political views, because that tends to be like the hallmark of the authoritarian, high degree of inflexibility and an insistence on others adhering to their belief systems, which I think is pretty well summarized by the idea of just having very, very rigid beliefs. One of the things that I thought was so interesting was what an incredibly low dose this seems to have been. Um, they're literally across a week taking a total of 35 milligrams of psilocybin. And as a result of it, they're having, like I said, based on the survey, up to 12 months. And I was pointing this out to Alex. I don't think it was like, oh, they came back in the 13th month and they're like, oh, no, I've completely reverted. I think the 7 to 12 months was just as long as the survey lasted. And you probably find that there are still some pretty strong residual effects in uh, reducing rigidity in political beliefs. And also, one of the other counterparts of the paper was it wasn't just a single reduction in political views that might be authoritarian. It was also an increased connectedness to nature. And I thought that was kind of an interesting finding of theirs, because it kind of points to this concept of unity that Doblin was talking about in the first article I discussed, the relational processes in ayahuasca groups of Palestinians and Israelis. It's the idea that we're capable of having unity-based connections that transcend our national identities and give us a sense of shared humanity and togetherness. And I think that one of the first steps that this research paper is pointing out is that a lot of that starts with the increased connection to nature, a sense of connection to the world around you, and outside of that, an opportunity to feel a connection to people around you. And so an opportunity to maybe get outside of your own perspective on your experiences and allow yourself to adopt some new opinions or beliefs about what effect they might have had and whether or not they were good or bad. So, like I said, I found this to be a very fascinating concept. I think most people who've done psychedelics can probably attest to the idea that there is like a reduction in the rigidity of your beliefs. There is more of a sense of unity and connection with others. And so I kind of wanted to go on that theme for a moment and just kind of take the opportunity to discuss a little bit like some of the changes that I personally have experienced. Maybe you, Alex, and you, Guy, if you had the or sorry, if you have the desire to kind of talk about um, some of the shifts in beliefs or paradigm perspectives you might have had as a result of the use of psychedelics. I know for myself, it was an essential aspect in recovering my mental health after Iraq. You feel so divided and disconnected from everyone that everything kind of feels like a threat to some degree. And I just remember on one of my first, experiences doing this was walking away from what was basically an ineffable experience. But the one thing that I knew more than anything was that I was connected with other people in a way that I'd never really felt connected before. And when I look back on that, I think that was kind of the beginning of like the birth of or the growth of some empathy inside of me, the ability to maybe see reflections of myself and other people, um, and maybe imagine what their worldview might actually look like, and maybe why they might also have their worldview. Obviously, that didn't come online like right away, but I would definitely argue that as a result of my experience with these with these ceremonies, that that's been like a noticeable change inside of me. I mean, full disclosure, I come from a really conservative, waspy background, and so for me, there was just a lot of undoing about the idea that things like meditation or reading other religious texts were sinful or wrong, and that's another aspect outside of what would be considered like typical political beliefs. I really think a lot of religion is kind of like the predecessor to our modern political arena, wherein it's all really grounded in the same belief system of some hierarchy where there's this being with supreme power. And I think for a lot of people through politics, it's the governments. And, the way to look at politics and whether or not you're satisfied with your relationship tends more to have to do with whether or not the group that you agree with is in control. And I think that that's a pretty classic model for a lot of conflict inside of religions as well. All you have to do is go back to the first few councils to see how many folks like Origen were anathemaed out of Christianity, so they could have a more defined and individualized belief that didn't involve, in that case, reincarnation. So yeah, I was wondering from your guys' experience, having used these kind of uh, substances for ceremonies, have you guys been able to kind of identify like areas where you might have had some beliefs dissolved, or maybe found yourself growing in degrees with empathy that's allowed you to feel more connected and unified with others around you?
Definitely. Growing up, you kind of just get told to you like what's the right way, what's the wrong way, how people are wrong, with different beliefs, different stances on things that are have a apparently a clear cut answer for certain groups of how things should be handled. But I feel like on the whole empathy side, it kind of helped me sit with this idea of that people are just playing out several patterns at once, whether it's generationally and genetically from their family's genetics, as well as patterns from like their culture and environment. And so I kind of become a little bit more understanding of how someone can have such differing views. And I don't get into a big I don't get to into a fight with someone um to kind of I feel like I'm not going to be, the hero for my team, my political side, to start an argument and try to shout down someone else, to make them see the right way of doing things. I kind of just there's still some things that I just don't sit well with me, and I do disagree with, but I'm I'm kind of uh at a point that I'm just kind of understanding that people are just playing out a different pattern than myself. And so because there's been points that, I still come to realizations of how I'm wrong on something, and I'm like, and that could hurt, that could sting, but I kind of when I if I don't get too much grief over it, I try to reserve that for other people too, because I mean we're all going to be making mistakes. It's all about time and place, and uh who you're talking to. But yeah, I've definitely stepped away. I politically, I see myself as being kind of like the enemy of both sides, which is a moderate, just because I'm kind of willing to see both sides. And if I'm in the presence of one particular, let's say, political group, um, and everyone's kind of just echo chambering each other, I can't help but kind of fostering the devil's advocate that side kind of comes out of me. But yeah, it's definitely broken up the concrete as far as like how my rigid views kind of dictated who I was and my identity.
Yeah, and I can really appreciate what you're saying about kind of operating in a place of judgment about other people. I think that a lot of judgment comes from a lack of experience. Like we don't recognize what someone's doing, and so we judge it as good or bad, normally bad. And so that's what I find so interesting about the veteran experiences, because you have veterans who are already having like a unique series of experiences that are way outside cultural norms for most people. But then on top of that, and I go to that lack of experience, the journey that you have with psychedelics, like I said, it's ineffable. It can be hard to even put words to, but I think in that you end up with an experience that makes it very difficult to be judgmental of others. Not to say you can't be, but just that once you begin to like tread that path, it's really hard to look at people with a critical eye. Because number one, I recognize when I was there. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like sometimes antagonizing other people is about as good as antagonizing yourself. So might as well just sit back and let them, kind of what you're saying, go through the process they're going through.
Right. Well, if you're going to be judgmental of another person and be like harsh about it, it's like you're coming from a place of almost like the ego's telling yourself that like, oh, I'm perceptive and I know what's right. I could see the things inside this person. But if that's true, then you would be able to recognize those things about yourself. And so, if you do any type of self contemplation, then you're going to run into these snags within yourself anyways. And so it's like how you react to seeing them in others is kind of it's going to be kind of telling to see if you've actually been doing any of that, been paying attention about your own kind of faults and where you could kind of be a little bit more understanding, empathetic, slow to judgment type of stuff.
A lot of times, I know this is true with my kids particularly. It's the ways that they act like you that tends to bother you the most. It's the part of you that you can't admit to yourself. So I'll see my daughter talk to my younger daughter, kind of a rude way, and I'll remember when I was younger and I would talk like that, and it was like, oh man. So yeah, it'd be so much easier to yell at her and tell her not to do that. You know what I mean? But then there's no responsibility for myself. There's no ownership. There's no realization that there's something to be mediated now, or excuse me, remediated. Um, so yeah, definitely. It's like when you meet somebody and they have like a very similar personality to you, or like mannerisms, and it's like, kind of immediately a turn off. Like what is this?
Mm.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. So we get most bothered by the things that we see in others that really exist unconsciously in ourselves.
The first time I took a psychedelic, there was a sort of this coming on period where I guess the ruminations that were going on just kind of stopped. And it seemed like this was sort of a tape loop. And I could almost see it floating, uh, you know, 20 feet in front of me or something like that. And just having that separated, I realized like, wow, I've been, saying this stuff on, for it's just like the wallpaper. You don't even notice it. It just keeps going. And so a lot of that was from some insecure places of being, uh, um, shy and introverted and thinking that, oh, people are judging me for this or that. And it's just like, no, that I'm the one running this tape thing. It's me. And then the thing about, I think some of the things you touched on were sort of forgiving other people and forgiving yourself, and it's just a lot easier to do it that way. And instead of, I mean, I had some real almost like high school ideas about people who wore these clothes or had these possessions and stuff, and just realized, well, that stuff doesn't really matter, but it's where they're coming from an ego stance, and that's kind of made it a little easier to see where, not so much to judge people, but to see their compatibility or incompatibility. And the thing you mentioned about rigid thinking, I was my, my um, parents were in the military, so I had a lot of regimental places to, how you're supposed to be and all this stuff. But it, well, where was I going with that? Um, so anyway, had a lot to overcome it. Just, looking at other ways of the way people look at the world, like Buddhism and things like that. Just, it's not like I'm a Buddhist, but comparing that to Christianity and looking for the good stuff, and not all the crazy stuff really made a big difference with me.
Yeah, being open to other belief systems, that was a huge thing for me. I remember when I got done with one of my meditations, I felt like really compelled to get a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. And I read like the intro, which is pretty good. It talked about Huxley's perennial philosophy, and that kind of opened up my idea that these religions might all be kind of a similar thread that's pulled through different epochs and different cultures based on what the cultures needed. Um, but the beginning of the bug, it's been a while, so I'm not going to give you the names right. But basically, you have this prince who's like, I believe the war's over, and he's looking at his dead cousins and his dead uncles. And God shows up and is like, "Why are you so bummed out?" And he's like, "I just killed my family." And God kind of looks at him and is like, "Yeah, but that's what needed to happen." So I think there's this strong sense that a lot of things that are maybe undesirable are maybe part of the process as well. And that's not something that you really find in Christianity. You would just subjectively call that evil. So just beginning to see that there was belief systems out there that make room for just the general chaos of humanity, and that things will get wild and wars will happen and there will always be poor people. That really kind of opened my eyes up in a way that maybe I don't know, because I think a lot of Christianity presupposes that there's like a problem to be solved. So I know that from my youth, there was this idea that you were going to go out and evangelize the whole world. Let's get everyone saved. Um, and so it's almost like it's a competition. It's trying to get see who can get the most numbers. And I don't think that's a very good foundation for a spiritual um, trajectory.
Sure. Well, I think all of the most of these major religions have, they pulled on this thread of, let's just call it like the absolute truth of something, and it's kind of filtered out through a time and a culture and the imperfection of just people. And there's stuff on both sides that I still struggle with. Like I feel like Hinduism and Buddhism seems to be a lot more of a peaceful type of religion or stance on how things are, but I still struggle with the caste system. Um, and just accept with the idea of just having to accept like this is what people deserve, and then that's what they're getting, and it's like, oh gosh. But staying open to these different religions and what they have to say has been pretty interesting, because it's like I don't have a absolute um sure answer for what actually is what's the right answer, as far as like what's the right religion or what's the closest one to being absolute truth. But it's kind of fun to kind of being able to have that freedom to contemplate them equally, instead of having being tied down by one is like, this is my primary, this is the one that I believe. But you can't really let go as easily to kind of take
Yeah.
one on.
I think for me, much like politics, a lot of religion relies really heavily on programming. It was kind of like what you were talking about there, Guy, that when you're raised in a family with like people in the military, you become very used to that regimented lifestyle. You know that you're supposed to be up at a certain time, your teeth are brushed, you've eaten, you've done all these things, and there are expectations. And I feel like with religion and with politics, like they do that in their own subtle ways, whether it's the virtue you signal, whether it's the beliefs you hold, or how you worship, or what you eat or what you don't eat. They're really basic programming that, it's what you said, held some kind of truth historically, and now it's turned into like an institution almost. And I don't think institutions reflect spirituality well. So that's where I think the inherent danger comes from. So, and I mean, going back to the programming concept, this still, I would, and this comes from William Burroughs, the guy who wrote Naked Lunch, but he has this idea that as soon as wake up and realize what's going on, the first thing that you need to do is like deprogram or decontrol yourself, really get a good idea of what's actually happening around you right now. Because I think a lot of politics and religion, they kind of pull you into a place where you're always looking back to the past with a bit of nostalgia and trying to recreate that in the present. And I feel like that's probably a source of great suffering for a lot of people, is not realizing that you can't drag the past into the present. One thing that I would comment on is that there is a process for like deprogramming yourself. And it all starts with looking for inconsistencies and contradictions. If you can start looking for the inconsistencies and the contradictions in the programming that you're being fed, then you can begin to start understanding how those inconsistencies are being used to manipulate you into believing in some kind of perceived stability that's making you and other people feel safe. I think what most people struggle with that equation is trying to figure out like what the motive behind that would be. Well, why would anyone do that? And it really just comes down to the simple desire to maintain or improve their place in a specific hierarchy. If you look at the role of religion and government, particularly here in the U.S., there's this idea that there's like this antagonism behind them, a wall between church and state. But that's not, I mean, that's a statement from Jefferson. That's not constitutional. I think if you were to look accurately at the relationship between the church and the state, it's pretty cohesive. The churches don't engage in political speech that would be viewed as negative towards the state. And as a result, the state won't charge the churches taxes. They're both getting their own benefit. Because I really think in a lot of ways, these religions, 2,000 years ago, this would have essentially been the state. You would have had a authoritarian theocratic state, with some kind of governor, maybe even a priest governor. But yeah, it would have been your daily life and culture or politics would have been indistinguishably intertwined with your religion as well. So yeah, just an observation that I've made when you're dealing with a situation where you're being programmed, or you have been programmed, which is all of us. I mean, all of our beliefs are all programming. We're just doing what other people have shown us. Start paying attention to how things don't add up. Look for the inconsistencies. Look for the contradictions, and start trying to determine how it's being used to give you that sense of safety, because I really feel like that's what most people are looking for. They want a sense of identity, they want a sense of purpose, and they want a sense of belonging. And I think all three of those things come together to give a person a sense of safety that we're all kind of desperately desiring. So just my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, that's a good point because I mean, people will continue on this programming or pattern of how to live to be able to feel like they still have a sense of belonging within a community or a group. And the teachings or the programming hasn't survived really, it doesn't still have the efficacy in the modern time. People will carry stuff on just because, my father, my grandfather, my great grandfather, they've all been this way. We did this thing, this is what we do, and it's like, but it doesn't really serve it the same way anymore. But you know yeah, people will do uh some nutty things to be able to feel like to validate their sense of belonging in a group, because if you don't have anyone validating you, then how can you tell yourself that you're on the right path?
It's even worse than that. I mean, I would go no further than pointing to Socrates and his decision to drink hemlock. He could have been exiled. He could have just left Greece and wandered. But the problem is we in the West don't get this. Being on your own in the past was like a death sentence, or like a guarantee for slavery. You would be captured and bonded, or you'd just be killed and robbed. And that's why I believe that's why Socrates killed himself, is because he was looking at the alternative: either become a destitute person and die under another man's terms, or take your own life. So I just think generationally, across millennia, we don't fully understand how important belonging used to be to us. Without belonging, it was literally a death sentence. And so I think that's why it's such a subtle desire, sorry, such a constant desire for humans to seek a sense of belonging, or to find a group that we can fit in with, which is so funny because this is like kind of at odds with our culture right now, because our culture, our marketing, all of this is about breaking ourselves into the most individual individualized people we can be without a sense of community, and more focused on our interests and desires as they affect us individually. And I think a lot of this comes out of the Freudian model of focusing not exclusively, but largely on the self and unifying that, because it comes at I would argue, it comes at the loss of the community. Ironically enough, it's really effective if you want to market to people, though. You can break them up into the most individualized groups possible, and then based on their interests, especially if you have an algorithm or some kind of social media that will hit them with advertisements, you can begin to queue up your marketing in a way that you're getting absolutely the most effective marketing possible out there. But like I said, it's also coming at the cost of the community. That's what I would argue, that this overly individualistic society we live in is kind of, as a consequence, it's breaking up the old well, yeah, now that I'm saying that, it's breaking up the old communities, but I guess you maybe need to do that in order to make room for new ones too. It's the inevitable ebb and flow of time, that the pendulum must swing both ways, and sometimes it will pass right through the middle.
So
Yeah,
that's our new religion now, like consumerism and
Yeah,
marketing.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
oh, sorry.
one of the things, you know the tribalism. I mean, when we were in the Near East, and we didn't realize how belonging to each, we thought, oh, everyone will go just vote for what's good for the community. No, it's just they're really, Afghanistan and Iraq and all that. They all have their own special uh, places groups they belong to.
Yeah, whether it's religious sects or completely different ethnic groups like the Kurds. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody. Well, and that's what you'll find is normally the groups will like get behind each other, particularly whoever's the most organized. I'll never forget the shoot. When was it? The coup that happened. Well, not coup, but in the beginning, it was the overthrowing of the president in Egypt. Um, and it was supposed to be like a color revolution and a democratic movement, but the only people that had enough power to actually consolidate it and use it for like effective political maneuvering were the Muslim Brotherhood. So you end up with like a somewhat extremist group in a democracy, because really it just comes down to who's the most organized. And that tends to be where money finds itself resting. And right now we're back to the marketing and the public, sorry, we're back to the public marketing, and we're back to individualizing people, and breaking up communities. Because if people are connected organically, then you have like political movements and you have grassroots movements and things like that. But by keeping everyone so divided, it kind of ensures that there's never going to be any kind of consolidated response to a lot of the dysfunction that we're all seeing. Yeah. Fromm actually talks about what you were mentioning. I appreciate what you're saying. I think you're more right than maybe you realize, but I would argue that absolutely consumerism has become like the new religion of the West. And you can basically the god of this religion is um, consumption. And so you can determine whether or not God's happy with you or God's not happy with you based on whether or not you've consumed more this year than you did last year. And if you didn't consume more, then God must not be happy with you. And you need to do things to remedy that relationship, like go get a side gig or a second job or whatever. But it's all just about pushing you back out into the workplace to try to make a fraction of the dollar off of what your employer is making, and then go back and put that into another consumerist interest that you might have for a moment. So yeah, and it's like praying. You go to the church and you pray and you walk out and you feel a little bit better. Well, now they deliver it to your home, and when you get there and you see that brown Amazon box with the blue tape, oh boy, that's when you get that little dopamine hit. That little sense of maybe some serotonin too. God loves me. Things are going well right now. So yeah, I think you're really on the nose with the idea that consumerism has become our new religion. It'd be interesting to codify its 10 Commandments.
sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's kind of interesting to think that like if you're continuing that train of thought, it's like you replaced tithing as like a sacrifice to like tithing yourself.
Oh yeah, or your children, or your firstlings. We'll just take your money now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Just keep the subscription alive.
yeah. One, and it's like it's intertwined with the belonging too, because eventually people are going to start asking about your tithe, even if it's the leadership of the church, so it's all pay to play.
Right. Just don't lose your Amazon Prime membership.
Yeah, don't do that. You'll be so disconnected. How would you even know what other people are interested in?
Or what movies are out right now.
Yeah, right. How would you know what everyone else is watching? Yeah. It's so funny too, because even as we're being individualized, we still yearn for the community. I was in a class over the summer and we were discussing social media, and somebody made a comment that when they would look at something on Instagram, they normally didn't feel very much about it until they went and checked the comments to see what other people were saying about it. And I was just thinking that's so funny because historically that would be like the town square, or that would be the water cooler that people would gather around and talk and form opinions and see what the kind of the social beliefs were. And now we're just reduced to like, 160, character responses on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, um, rather than any kind of real meaningful connection. And for all you know, it's a bot or some kind of algorithmic response, not even a real person. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. It has the convenience side, though you're lacking the face-to-face connection, so you're not really actually interacting in the way that you would if you really were face-to-face with the person. So that's an interesting like change in dynamic, but then also just the potential and the prevalence of fake people and like false opinions meant to get a reaction out of you or to get you to have a certain response. I mean, there's all different types of stuff online of what was it? Was it like 9 out of 10 of the most popular Christian Facebook groups were ran by bot farms?
Yeah, like Russian bots or something. Yeah. Well, and I think now you're really getting to the core of it. Everything in America is a business. And so any belief, any interest, any value that you hold can be monetized. And that is what we're seeing is if it can be monetized, well, then you can run a scam on the monetization of it as well. So it's just like this is expanding, like basically everything's being commoditized, including your beliefs. Everything's got a price tag, so it's pretty fascinating. It's funny. So this is a bit of a shift, but maybe not quite as much with the comment section. I remember watching this interview with Eric Schmidt quite a few years ago, the former CEO of Google, and he was commenting about how he only wanted Google to provide one response. That if they were giving more than one response, then they weren't doing a good job. That they wanted the search bar to be so responsive that it would give you all the information you wanted off of a single query, rather than needing to go through the first 10 pages or anything like that. And I remember thinking to myself, like, well, that sounds cool, but that's also a really easy way to like give people very limited information that fits the context of a narrative that you're interested in. And I saw this article a few days ago, I guess as a result of AI. You know how AI will pop up a response at the top of the Google results? You'll get like an
Yeah.
AI response. I guess 87% of the time, Google users go no further than that response. So it's literally happening. That idea that they found a way to covertly slip in like a single response that you'll just rely on unilaterally and completely.
I I hear what you're saying, but I feel like a lot of people that use, some people know how to use a search engine. Some people will just ask their question into a search engine and hope there's a Yahoo answer that kind of is close enough in the wording to what they're trying to ask. So I don't know. I take that with a grain of salt. Because it's like, how much here's my recipe. How much of this and this ingredient do I use based on I'm trying to make something 1.5 times the size. Uh, Sometimes it'll give you your answer.
Well, and I'm not being critical of Google. I'm talking more about the human
Why not?
impulse.
I'm just kidding.
What's that? Well,
I
I mean,
said, why
because they're just
not? No,
going to
I'm
do what
kidding.
they're a profit making business. They're going to do what they do, with heavy funding from InQtel. Uh, but it's the human desire for simplicity. You know what I mean? Just to get something without a lot of effort. I think that's maybe more what I'm speaking to. And I guess maybe he might have been catching on too early on that people don't want a lot of choices. They just want the answer. And if it's only 90% true, good enough.
That's true. I mean,
I just see a lot of negative consequences coming out of that lost 10%.
no, I hear you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, there's that. Yeah, it's how you play it, and you have if you know how to use the technology, because it's like, yeah, I could look up. There's a couple different ways I could look up how to do something, and if I need it done right now, tell me technology, tell me the answer, or I could be searching for a list of fucking places to eat or whatever, options for a vendor for something that I need. But yeah, the thing is that it's the consumerism culture has definitely there's definitely been an increase on simplicity and like single click get your things. And so yeah, at the end of the day, let's just jump to the, I don't know, 20 years from now, like how many different types of third-party vendors will there actually be?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that kind of speaks to maybe I'm of the mindset that our society is it has shifted very hard into the role of specialists. That people tend to focus on doing single tasks for their professional work, and they're a lot less dynamic than they used to be. The problem with that is that lack of dynamism also robs your life of meaning because all those little things you used to do were adding to the purpose of your existence and kind of regulating your physiology, giving you dopamine, serotonin, cortisol when you need it, just to kind of keep you going. And without that, we try to find synthetic ways to do it, which you typically see a lot of people just statically sitting on their ass playing video games or scrolling through social media as a way to induce maybe some of those responses that they used to be that there used to be. But I think that's just the inherent nature of the economy we live in, that we're putting so much emphasis on specialization. There's not a lot of room for much more dynamism than that, and the specialization tends to be so intense. It's like you're working at a factory and you spend all day building a car. You go through the whole process of getting the frame put together, getting the engine mounted, transmission seated, the whole nine, and it's a pretty dynamic process. That's a way different experience than putting 300 wheels on a car or on a new car every day. You know what I mean? One allows for growth and experience. The other one is kind of like at odds with the concept of experience because it's so rote. After you do it a few times, it's almost like some Sisyphean journey. Um, and I feel like that's what a lot of people's jobs are defined as now, is just like these Sisyphean tasks that never end. Um, and they're so compartmentalized from the whole project.
Good point.
Yeah. So, but that was just my general take on the concept of psychedelics and its usefulness in I mean, just to go another route, I was telling Alex that I was watching the Chaos series on Netflix, and they were kind of discussing Manson and some of the use of psychedelics, but then also programs like I don't think they talked about uh, Project Artichoke, but they were talking about MK Ultra. And I think this is why it's important to let the medicine do the work on its own, is because if you have people that are there, like the human mind is very malleable, especially if you're on a consciousness expanding drug, because it increases consciousness. You'll be more aware of what other people around you want or need. And if you have somebody that's engaging in like rhetoric or some kind of programming that's kind of at odds with these concepts of unity or flexibility or things like that, I think it's possible to induce that, but I think it takes the human hand to guide it. I don't think that's the natural outcome of these substances. I think there are people who've done a lot of work on how to manipulate other folks. And I mean, like I said, well, I didn't say, but all you have to do is go back to Bernays and read his book on propaganda to understand, how malleable humans are, even when they're not under the influence of psychedelics or some kind of consciousness expanding drug, or one that might be reducing rigid beliefs. So, there's two ways it can go. I brought this up last month about that was my concern with like mega churches getting into psychedelics is a lot of these pastors, man, they're pitching like prosperity gospels and other gospels that just have nothing to do with the original context of Christianity. So it makes you wonder, like, how much further can they stray from the original messaging before people start pushing back. So we appeal to authority, man. And if you put someone in a position of authority over you and they're making requests that might be outside of your existing values and you're on psychedelics, I don't know, man. That kind of lack of rigidity could be used for negative reasons or outcomes.
It makes me think of like Buddhism. I feel like someone at that point of observing like their church kind of pushing outside of the bounds of like the foundations in which it was built would kind of take this stance of um, lack of interest in playing the game and like taking a back seat and kind of just observing how people play out. Do you know what I mean? Like a
Hmm.
less active role and just kind of let patterns that people decide to reinforce just play out in their own way and taking less part in it.
Yeah.
At least that's what
Well, it's
happened to me.
part
That is subjective, but that's what I feel like happened to myself.
part of Leary's turn on, tune in, and drop out. Just let it go by.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up the concept of forgiveness earlier, and just from the reading that I've done, I kind of have a different take on that. I look at it more as like a letting go, and the reason you do it, I would point to the Buddha. It's because the attachment is the root of all pain, and if you're incapable of letting go, you're going to suffer. And so that's the importance of forgiveness to reduce your own suffering. So yeah,
Right.
yeah. Well, that's about all I got for today. I'm glad we were able to talk about politics without getting too contentious. So I thought it might be an interesting conversation.
Thanks everyone for coming through. If you would like to join us for a future event, then there'll be a link for the meetup page for future shows. Um, Guy was telling us that it wasn't showing up for the link for this show, but I'm gonna see if there's something I could change because I'm able to see it. So there's a disconnect there. But anyways, you could check the calendar for when we have upcoming shows and see if you're interested in joining us live, be able to ask some questions and whatnot. But we meet on the third Sunday of every month at 11 p.m. Pacific. So with that, thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for the good show.